This event was organized and put together by the Bard College chapter of the International Solidarity Movement. We're a support chapter of the ISM, which is based in Palestine. The ISM puts internationals on the ground in Palestine to non-violently and directly confront the Israeli military occupation by joining Palestinian communities in locally organized non-violent direct action. You can check out the ISM in Palestine at palsolidarity.org. As an ISM support chapter, we've hosted non-violence trainings for individuals and groups headed to Palestine, raised money for non-violent actions and efforts such as the Gaza flotilla, and hosted and promoted a number of speakers involved in nonviolent direct actions for Palestine, including former U.S. Ambassador Edward Peck, who was aboard the ill-fated Gaza flotilla, former State Department official Ann Wright, who was aboard as well, and others. We are also involved in efforts to build a global march to Jerusalem consisting of millions of people all over the globe that is taking place on March 30th, or Land Day. You can check out the details of the American contingent for this march, sponsored by Nobel laureates like Desmond Tutu at gmj-na.org. That's Global March to Jerusalem, North America. There are a number of campus organizations that involve activism and travel to Palestine, including our educational programs and some wonderful volunteer and philanthropy student projects. We hope to institutionalize ISM at Bard so that ideally we can begin sending Bard students to Palestine to participate in nonviolent civil disobedience. Although nonviolent activism in the Middle East has become prominent lately through the Arab Spring, Palestinian-led nonviolent activism, such as that which the ISM in Palestine is a part, has existed since at least the 1930s. As students, we want to keep it going and expand this project so that Bard's commitment to human rights for Palestinians and Israelis is not limited to the educational or the philanthropic, but also the political. If you're interested in what you're hearing, please join us. We meet on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. in Olin 205. And if you really like what you will hear today, please consider donating at the table in the back. And we also apparently have some wonderful $20 Palestinian calendars that are being sold back there as well. They're all really beautiful. Additionally, we are currently organizing a student trip to the Occupy AIPAC 2012 summit this weekend. AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is a pro-Israel lobby that helped push the United States into war with Iraq, is currently pressuring the Obama administration to attack Iran, and has lobbied consistently to send billions of your tax dollars to the Israeli military and pay for Israel's human rights abuses. We will join hundreds of other organizations and people in Washington this weekend to confront and occupy AIPAC. The trip is free, paid for by our student organization. And if you are interested in attending Occupy AIPAC this weekend, please join us tomorrow night at 7 p.m. in Olin 205. This is the third Israel Apartheid Week that we've organized on campus. Apartheid is not a slander against the State of Israel. It is a legal accusation against the State of Israel based on the legal definition of apartheid under international law. It is also the opinion of a number of legal scholars and leaders who lived under the South African apartheid regime that Israel is an apartheid regime or worse, including the opinions of people such as South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, and others. On your seat, you should have a fact sheet elaborating on this issue. If you want to find out more, you can go to itisapartheid.org. The other side of Israel Apartheid Week, which is an international effort being organized at colleges and communities all over the world, is to promote the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. BDS helped end apartheid in South Africa. Boycotting, divesting our institutions, and sanctioning the State of Israel can end apartheid in Palestine. Again, if you're interested in joining this campaign, please join ISM on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. in Olin 205. Every year, we come under a barrage of personal attacks, from people spitting on our banners to people calling Student Life to have our events shut down. Sometimes it can become petty, with other groups attempting to compete with us at sign making. But as the fact sheets in front of you demonstrate, we are doing nothing other than telling the truth. Every judge and every scientist, every intellectual, is called to make a judgment and essentially take a side when evidence is presented to them. The evidence is obvious and in front of your face. The truth mandates that we act, and it mandates that we take sides. Joining us tonight is a journalist who's well aware of the importance of telling the truth. He's been attacked by Republican Party elements, Zionist groups, and other propagandists. But unlike other journalists who fear criticism, Max Blumenthal is willing to step away from the so-called neutrality of the fake discourse promoted by American corporate media, which has assaulted our ears and minds with war propaganda and racism. As a journalist, Max does not tell, he exposes. And as you can tell from the essay in front of you, written by Max for The Nation and for Akbar, the level of detail and research he provides have a depth that is almost never heard in American media, certainly not about the Middle East. In this piece, Max describes the Israelification of American security and how Israeli security firms, lobbies, military units, and other powerful elements in the Israeli military occupation, and amongst the political and economic institutions and groups that back it, have helped to coordinate, train, and militarize domestic security here in the United States. Israeli border police and military work closely with American police officers, including members of the NYPD, who brutalized and manhandled peaceful American citizens participating in Occupy Wall Street. Indeed, I did not meet Max Blumenthal in a press office. I met him in Palestine when I was a member of the ISM in Palestine. He was sitting under a tree doing what he does best, telling the truth and gearing up to confront an illegal Israeli racial colony, also known as a settlement, being built on Palestinian shepherd land. Unlike career journalists who are becoming increasingly irrelevant, Max Blumenthal knows that exposing the truth requires confrontation, action, and willpower. His courage and willingness to act is a testament to what all Bard students should aspire to be. There's no point in graduating from a place to think without learning how to act. Ladies and gentlemen, Max Blumenthal.
How's everybody doing? Thanks a lot, Amit, for those words. I actually mostly get hate mail, so it's always reassuring and encouraging when I come before an audience like this and hear that kind of encouragement. Your canvas is, from what I've been able to learn about it today, dramatically different from the other canvases I've been visiting this week, in that the discussion seems to be much more open. I think maybe in Q&A I can talk about myself more, but I want to cover a lot of ground tonight. I wanted to talk about what's happening on different campuses around the country. I want to talk about what's happening inside Israel-Palestine, especially with the new laws. I want to talk about the Israel lobby and move into the election and end with what's happening with the push to war with Iran. All of these issues, we have to see them all as interconnected and seamless. We have to see the attacks on the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and these are often physical attacks, as seamless with the attacks on the Muslim American community, as seamless with the attacks on Palestinians in occupied West Bank and Gaza and inside Israel, and as seamless with the attacks on the people of Iran. I'm not talking about the government of Iran, the regime of Iran. What the United States is doing is targeting Iran with instruments of economic terror, which so far has only harmed average people. What's sort of remarkable about your campus is that there's no Zionist counter event tonight. I was at UCLA on Monday. In Berkeley yesterday, they had an Israeli soldier come to campus. There's scores of soldiers deploying throughout the U.S. For action, for Hasbara action. Hasbara is Hebrew for explanation. And they don't say their full names. My name is Max Blumenthal, and I don't really have a unit. I'm not representing any particular army, but these soldiers, they go by Alon G or Shai M, because why can't they use their full name? They fear universal jurisdiction. They fear prosecution for actual war crimes that they may have committed in the Gaza Strip. It's pretty tragic that these people are being presented as role models for Jewish American students who are going to go out into leadership positions in the Jewish community. At UCLA, they brought a band that's considered leftist in Israel, this hip hop band. Leaving aside that the music is just really appalling. Band Hadad Nahash is actually considered leftist, but they came to represent the state of Israel. And they performed in LA for the Zionist student groups at UCLA at a bar called Colony. This is one of my problems with Zionism. In my family we have a lot of Jewish humor. My grandfather said, And like the Zionists seem to have lost all sense of humor and irony. They're promoting this at a bar called The Colony, and I heard the after party lasts for 63 years. You know, when you see these counter events, this is a new thing. They used to send their students to events like these to heckle and disrupt. But what they're doing partly is preventing, SJP chapters, Students for Justice in Palestine chapters, from going to their events and staging walkouts. But another thing they're doing is preventing Jewish students from coming to these kind of events and hearing the message of equal rights, hearing the message of BDS, seeing what's happening in Palestine and possibly defecting to the other side. That's something that I went through pretty quickly after going on the Birthright Israel trip, and I just started examining what was going on after being shocked when the Birthright Israel tour leader told me, Max, you need to stop all this talk about multiculturalism and look at all groups in the world as circles, and then you have to put your circle, the Jewish people, above all the other circles. And I said, wait, isn't that the definition of racism? I was 22, I'd just gotten out of school, and I started, thinking about this, and I think this is a thought that's embedded in the mind of a lot of smart young Jewish kids, and what the Israel lobby is attempting to do through this initiative, a $6 million initiative to fight BDS, is to actually create kind of a firewall between them and the language and principles that we're promoting here, to prevent that the seeds of decency that are implanted in their mind through their liberal families and their liberal communities from actually growing and flourishing into something that might connect them to a movement for justice and true liberation. And then what we're seeing also is a parallel trend where Zionism has become synonymous with kind of people who are extreme. They're bringing in people like those Christian Zionists as sort of their new shock troops. Israel has become a partisan wedge issue. It's become a means of attacking from the Republican right, attacking Barack Obama, forcing him even further to the right. And it's attracting an element which I consider to be dangerous when I saw what happened this weekend in Berkeley, where a few Palestine solidarity demonstrators were randomly attacked with pepper spray and tased by Zionist activists in front of Noah's Bagels on Telegraph. You talk about the banality of evil. It's like an attack in front of a bagel place. Or you consider what happened when I spoke at the Penn BDS conference, the first annual conference at UPenn, my alma mater, to promote BDS. And two UPenn professors wrote editorials comparing us to Nazis and neo-Nazis. President Amy Goodman refused to condemn those editorials. Instead, she condemned us, Alan Dershowitz, who also goes on Twitter as the Dersh. I'm not him, by the way. Well, I swear I'm not the Dersh. Came to campus and spoke before 1,000 students. Was introduced by someone named David L. Cohen, who was speaking officially on behalf of Amy Goodman to welcome Alan Dershowitz to town. And David L. Cohen is the vice president of Comcast. He was also able to raise $1.2 million for Barack Obama in a single night, and I'm going to talk about this later. He welcomes Dershowitz, and Dershowitz comes out and says, professors who support BDS should be shamed and exposed in public, and I support the freedom of speech. Afterwards, beforehand, Dershowitz had thrown a temper tantrum because I had written an editorial correctly pointing out in the school paper that he had called for the bulldozing of entire Palestinian villages and the torture of criminal suspects by federal law enforcement officials using tactics including the shoving of syringes under their fingernails. And he said, Max Blumenthal, this is something he actually said, will cost Barack Obama his re-election with this kind of rhetoric. And Sarah Palin actually wrote on her Facebook page, Alan Dershowitz is right, but we may also have to consider that the economy is a factor. And so I'm sitting there reading this, I woke up at 2 in the afternoon, and I'm sitting there in my underwear in my apartment in Brooklyn reading this, and I pick up the phone, and I get on the phone with White House Chief of Staff Jack Lew, and I say, Jack, I don't know if you heard what Dershowitz said, but I want Walt and Mearsheimer in Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, respectively, if you expect to win this year. You got it? Puts Obama on first thing, and Obama says, "Look, let me be clear. Where's my teleprompter?" It's funny, but what's happening on campus is pretty serious. I mean, the violence is almost systematic. I don't know if any of you saw what happened at the University of New Mexico during their Israel apartheid week. Stand With Us, which is a major pro-Israel group, which according to Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Danny Ayalon, is used by the Israeli government for leverage inside the United States. Hosted Noni Darwish, who is an Islamophobic speaker, is an Islamophobe who calls Islam a vicious poison, and she was interrupted by some Palestine Solidarity protesters who were students at University of New Mexico, and they were immediately assaulted by, it was like the video was like one Zionist attack. They were immediately assaulted by aging men, pushed, shoved over chairs, thrown, young women forced out. And this is, we saw this happen at last year's AIPAC. Ray Abalea from Young Jewish and Proud was attacked when she interrupted Benjamin Netanyahu, who was attacked and was hospitalized. We've seen members of Jewish Voice for Peace pepper sprayed in Philadelphia, pepper sprayed in Berkeley. The people who pepper sprayed them this weekend in Berkeley were cited and released by the police, and it was not considered even political violence. Meanwhile, students on campus who are affiliated with Zionist groups are told to abuse Article 6 of the Civil Rights Act, which bans racial discrimination on campus, which implicitly says Jews are a separate race, and which sort of indulges anti-Semitic conspiracies. And they're claiming that they're the ones who are intimidated on campus, that they're the ones who are the victims, which is sort of consistent with the Israeli mentality of being the occupier, of being the bully, but being the one who sees himself as the victim. I wonder if they're going to seek, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, pepper spray exemptions in the near future. And Mark Yudof, the president of the University of California System, has put up a page on the UC website about everything he's doing to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to assist in this effort to protect Jewish students on campus who feel so threatened by people calling for the rights of Palestinians. One of the things he cites as a proud achievement is the criminal prosecution of the Irvine 11 Palestinian students from the UC system, including some who have family members who were killed in Operation Cast Lead in Israel's assault on the Gaza Strip in 2008 and 2009, interrupting, confronting their oppressor, Michael Oren, Israeli ambassador to the U.S., who was the spokesman for the Israeli army, who was a spokesman for the Israeli government and served in the Israeli army at the time of Operation Cast Lead. They interrupted him for 1 minute in L.A. In a speech he gave. And for this, they're prosecuted and charged with misdemeanors. And I always tell, when I go to different campuses, I always say, if you want to heckle me, feel free, and I can reassure you that if you're not Arab or Muslim, nothing will happen to you. This is a completely racially and religiously inspired prosecution of these students. And what part of the prosecution's case was that they prevented Michael Oren from giving a Q&A. But I went online and I found pictures of Michael Oren that night back in the locker room with Kobe Bryant at the Lakers game. It turned out he left his talk early because he had VIP courtside seats to see the Lakers. And the judge eventually allowed those photos to be presented for the court. It did no good. I've said this is seamless. This intimidation on campus is seamless with the persecution of Muslim Americans in the United States. And we saw this play out in the clearest way. You can read my article where I talk about years and years of Israeli training and coordination with American police forces and how this has instilled them with a mentality that's Islamophobic. They've trained them in how to take out suicide bombers. They're training cops from small towns in how to shoot suicide bombers in the head. Where are the suicide bombers? What they're really doing is instilling in them notion that Muslim Americans are all potential terrorists. And so the NYPD, the New York Police Department, has been exposed by the Associated Press for monitoring students, Muslim students, not just at every university and college inside New York City, but at Yale, at Rutgers, at UPenn, completely outside their jurisdiction. Now, who runs the New York Police Department? It's Ray Kelly, and I wrote about how Ray Kelly in 2009 went to this conference in Israel, the Herzliya National Security Conference, where major figures in the Israeli national security and intelligence establishment discussed the demographic peril, the demographic threat of Arab fetuses. And while right after Ray Kelly was on stage at this conference, touting the fact that, for example, he had sent a taxpayer-funded liaison to Tel Aviv on behalf of the New York Police Department, an Israeli-American scholar named Martin Kramer appeared and called young men in the Gaza Strip economically superfluous young men, which is genocidal rhetoric. Ray Kelly returned to the U.S. to create the demographic unit at NYPD, which sent what he called mosque crawlers into mosques, into Muslim bookstores. According to the Associated Press, they monitored every area of Muslim life in New York City with federal tax money, not just with local tax money, but with federal tax money. One former participant in this program told the Associated Press, what we're doing is mapping New York the way that Israel maps the West Bank. So there's a clear connection. And Michael Bloomberg has come out in support of the NYPD monitoring Muslim students. I mean, they've come up with some really important findings, actually. They sent operative undercover on a whitewater rafting trip with some members of the Muslim Student Association and found that they prayed 5 times a day. Watch out. I appreciate this statement by Richard Levin from Yale University, who said that the Yale MSA has been an important source of support for Yale students during a period when Muslims and Islam itself have too often been the target of thoughtless stereotyping, misplaced fear, and bigotry. But these comments are rare. In fact, UPenn's president, Amy Gutman, who I mentioned before, has not said anything yet. Now, what are they doing? I mean, why are they so hysterical? Why do we see this hysteria from grassroots Zionist groups? I mean, essentially, it's because they are defending the indefensible. And the debate is over. They can no longer debate on an equal footing. They can no longer defend the notion of a Jewish exclusivist state in public anymore. So what they seek to do instead is intimidate and use censorious smears to prevent that debate from happening. Even J Street's director, this supposedly pro-Israel, pro-peace group, which has put up signs around campus, I hear, that say pro-Palestine, pro-Israel. I mean, first of all, it's not like 2 football teams squaring off on a whole round. It seems very schizophrenic. Jeremy Ben-Ami said, we will not debate a Palestinian on BDS. In fact, when Rebecca Vilkomerson from Jewish Voice for Peace attempted to substitute herself with Omar Barghouti at J Street's annual conference last year, they refused and said, we need to keep this debate within the Jewish community. Which is funny, I debated J Street on BDS at Princeton, and I found out that the reason I was asked to do this debate was Jewish substitution. I was there to substitute for a Palestinian because they will not have that discussion with someone who has actually been personally oppressed or victimized by Zionism, who may have been ethnically cleansed or had a grandfather who was a refugee. And this is symptomatic of what's happening. This is reflective of what's happening inside Israel. We see law after law passing through the Knesset designed to suppress and criminalize those who advocate for equal rights for the Palestinian citizens of Israel. I'm going to talk about why in a second, but let me just discuss some of the laws. I interviewed an Arab member of Knesset from the Balad Party, which calls for Israel as a state of all its citizens, named Jamal Zahalkin. He said he had a bet with a friend at the beginning of the new Knesset in 2009. His friend said, if there isn't a racist or anti-democratic law that passes through the Knesset for a week, I'll throw a huge party for you and all your friends. And he said, so far I haven't had any parties. There is most recently the law of entry and return, which was first passed in 2003 validated temporarily by the Israeli Supreme Court, which is supposed to be the last liberal element in Israel. It prevents West Bank Palestinians from marrying Palestinian citizens of Israel. Meanwhile, Jewish settlers who live in the West Bank can happily marry Jews who live in Tel Aviv. So this is one of the most clear examples of apartheid that we have. And Adallah, the Legal Rights Center inside Israel, has found that no other democratic country in the world has a law like this, to the extent that Israel is a democracy at all. And here we have the 14th Amendment, so if you want to go to France and marry Jean-Luc from the cafe, that's totally cool. In Israel, that's inconceivable if you're part of the outcast race, if you don't have J-positive blood. And the Supreme Court has said that. They used to make these arguments based on security, based on what Israelis call bitachon, which is the excuse for everything. The Supreme Court finally, in their decision permanently validating this law, said this is about demographics. There's the BDS law. If you do what we're doing inside Israel, and some settler decides that we're hurting his business, which he has a vineyard on top of usurped Palestinian land in the West Bank, and he decides without needing any evidence he or she can sue us in a civil court in Israel and seek financial penalties. So there's a huge chilling effect, and Israeli online publications are afraid to say anything in favor of BDS now, or even explore the benefits, the assets of BDS. It's an attack on free speech. Those who seek to observe the Nakba within an institutional setting, within Palestinian and Israeli organizations, face financial penalties now under laws authorized by the Knesset. Alon Liel, it's not just me or you guys who are saying that this resembles apartheid. It's Alon Liel, who's the former Israeli ambassador to South Africa, who said Israel requires outside intervention. We're going to talk about why that intervention is not forthcoming from Washington, which speaks to the necessity and importance of BDS. And the Knesset is filled with people like Ofer Akunis, who's an open admirer of Joseph McCarthy. He said every word McCarthy said was right. Or Sipi Hoteveli, who said that her job is to replace Arab members of Knesset with Jewish members of Knesset, who has held Knesset hearings on assimilation and the dangers of Jewish-Arab relationships. Why are they doing this? It's because those who they're seeking a right to a Jewish state, and this is what that right requires. If you're in law school, my friend Ali Al-Remember pointed this out at BDS, if you're in law school, one of the first things you learn is that every right has a remedy, and the remedy to the right to a Jewish state is these sorts of laws limiting the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel and ethnic cleansing, because the Jewish and democratic state that's enshrined in the Israeli Declaration of Independence makes Palestinian citizens of Israel the victims of democracy. If they pass a certain demographic threshold, the threshold that Israel has laid out, that Benjamin Netanyahu publicly laid out in 2003, when he came out for the Israeli separation law, he came out for it, not for security reasons, but because, in his words, it prevents demographic spillover. The threshold is 30%. They've decided that if the population of Israel, the minority non-Jewish population, reaches over 30%, it's a binational state, and they've run the risk of potential of, theoretically, electing an Arab or non-Zionist prime minister, which would make it simply a democratic state, not a Jewish and democratic state. So to maintain a Jewish and democratic state, they have to do things like home demolitions in Jerusalem, which they've annexed, and inside Israel. 1,100 home demolitions this year alone. Israel has demolished 25,000 homes since 1967. This is purely for demographic reasons. It has nothing to do with security. I witnessed personally a village be completely wiped off the map of Israeli citizens, but they were Bedouins. It's an unrecognized village. There are dozens and dozens of unrecognized villages in Israel. That means that the state refuses to hook them up to the electricity grid, refuses to hook them up to the water grid, refuses to provide services to them because they're not Jewish. This is a Bedouin village. Israel has a plan right now to concentrate, this is the language used in the plan, concentrate 30,000 Bedouins who are living in the Negev desert on their ancestral land into their version of Indian reservations, like the city of Rahat. These are the only new Arab cities that Israel has authorized construction of. And they are essentially Indian reservations for concentration. They'll replace those Bedouin communities like the village of Al-Araqib, which has been demolished 30 times in the past year. 30 times, the entire village. They will replace them with Jews-only communities, and they've passed a special law, the Community Acceptance Law, which mandates that if those communities have under 500 people, they have the right to exclude people on the basis of ethnicity. And so they want to build these small communities throughout the Negev, which is what they call their new demographic battleground. They say, I can quote Arnon Sofer, who is a professor at Haifa University and is a close consultant to Benjamin Netanyahu, who said, the government must start taking action and not flounder in the defense. We do not have another country. I'm not wrong about this terrible map, and I hope that I am wrong. Israel will simply be destroyed by the Bedouin population. So the greatest threat is Arab fetuses. This is very difficult to defend in public, let alone discuss. Israel has deported a Japanese researcher recently, who is an expert in Gershom Scholem, the great Jewish philosopher. This Japanese researcher spoke fluent Hebrew, and they said, we fear that he might settle down because he's not Jewish. Israel's created a concentration camp in the Negev desert for African migrants. I didn't call it a concentration camp. The Speaker of the Knesset from the Likud party, Reuben Rivlin, called it a concentration camp. He said, I don't think we should build a concentration camp. Instead, we should build a wall on our border with the Sinai Desert that the Africans, where the Africans enter. Benjamin Netanyahu said that he would build that wall to protect the Jewish character of the state. And so they've authorized new legislation to deport and detain thousands of migrants who are now living and working in Tel Aviv, who have families there, who speak Hebrew. And they're basing this law on a 1954 law that was used to stop what they called Palestinian infiltrators. They were Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed in 1948, who sought to return to their homes and families. The Nakba is continuous. The Nakba continues today, and it continued well after 1948. And we can't look at these new laws that I'm talking about as distinct from what happened before 1967. What they're doing, what Israel has done, what Israeli society has done, through exhaustion, through trauma, through this siege mentality, is elect a Knesset and elect politicians who promise, politicians like Avigdor Lieberman, who promise to finish the job and create and consolidate Israel as a Jewish state. In the words of early onset Alzheimer's, they are simply, they voted for these laws. The politicians campaigned to pass these laws, and they voted for them, they support them. And these laws are targeted specifically at the Palestinian citizens of Israel for demographic reasons. Now I'm going to get to Iran here, but how does Iran, and all this tension with Iran, and the saber rattling by Israel at Iran relate to this demographic situation? Now there was a junior minister in the government of Yitzhak Shamir in 1989 who spoke at Bar Ilan University, which is an Israeli university that's the bastion of religious nationalism of the right wing in Israel. And he said the following: Israel should have taken advantage of the suppression of the demonstrations in China, Tiananmen Square, when the world's attention was focused on what was happening in that country, to carry out mass expulsions among the Arabs in the territories. However, to my regret, they didn't support that policy that I proposed, and which I will propose be implemented. That junior minister's name was Benjamin Netanyahu. Martin Van Crevel, who's the most renowned military historian inside Israel, said that Israel, in order to carry out massive campaigns of ethnic cleansing, to maintain its demographic advantage, seeks what Israelis would call she'at kosher, which is a politically opportune moment of military crisis to do things like this. The first one was, of course, 1948. Some of you know about Plan Dalet. You know about the destruction of over 400 Palestinian villages, the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians. This all happened under the cover of war. The world was watching the war. The world didn't understand that there was a concerted plan to alter the demographic landscape to create space for a Jewish state, a Jewish exclusivist state to emerge. And in 1967, the same thing happened. 300,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed out of Israel, and many soldiers returned with stories of orders they received from their commanders to shoot Palestinians seeking to return across the Jordan River. Many of the killings, the most horrific killings, were of Palestinians trying to return to their homes. But Israel has not had a Shiat kosher since 1967, something that war with Iran could potentially provide. But more than that, and that's just it could be considered wild speculation, figures in Israel's military intelligence establishment have said openly that they fear that their fear is not that Iran will actually use a nuclear weapon on Israel if it ever gets one, which I'm not even sure they will, because they would have to wipe out the Palestinian population as well. They'd also have to cope with the fact that Israel has 250 nuclear weapons. And by the way, Israel refuses to sign the non-proliferation treaty or allow inspectors from the IAEA inside the country. They fear that 100,000 well-educated, cosmopolitan, economically upwardly mobile Israelis will leave Israel if this threat is looming for a better life in Europe or the United States. So again, it's the demographic peril of Israel that's guiding their policy on Iran. So it's impossible to look at Israel as a normal country. It has to be looked at as a settler colonial state that's constantly fighting this demographic war, which keeps it in a permanent state of war and is leading it to push for this war with Iran, which would potentially be the most catastrophic war on a global scale that it's ever engaged in. The renowned economist Nouriel Roubini has said that an attack on Iran would lead to a global recession. So Barack Obama is campaigning for re-election. I'm sure you all are familiar with the attacks on him. That video that you saw, clips from a video I did, Feeling the Hate in Jerusalem, which sort of served as a, it was like a blueprint for Republican strategy against Obama. And I was mercilessly attacked, including by Democrats, including by Obama bot bloggers for releasing that video, but now they kind of accept that there is this deep-seated hatred, irrational hatred of him, partly stemming from the fact that his middle name is Hussein and he has Muslim heritage. And they've leveraged that hatred in order to intimidate Barack Obama and force him to overcompensate. And to keep those who have mainstreamed that resentment have primarily been in the pro-Israel community. So Obama recently released a video through his political handler, David Axelrod. I don't know if any of you saw this. I should have queued it up. And it features him with major Israeli officials, including Benjamin Netanyahu, shaking hands and showing the Israeli officials, praising him for all the weapons he's given Israel. They're basically singing Kumbaya together. Actually, in private, Obama's relationship with Netanyahu is terrible. And one of the figures who appears to praise Obama in this video, which the Obama campaign is openly promoting, is Danny Ayalon. Who is Danny Ayalon? He is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel. He was the spokesman for Avigdor Lieberman for years. Avigdor Lieberman is Mr. Ethnic Cleansing. He is he's practically a pariah in world capitals. He has said that the Arab citizens of Israel should pack their bundles and leave. He's called for the execution of Arab members of Knesset openly. He's called for the bombing of the Aswan Dam in Egypt, which would lead to hundreds of thousands of deaths. He has gone to the UN and called for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians through a unilaterally imposed Plan Lieberman. And this is, which would effectively transfer at least 25,000 Palestinian citizens of Israel to the Palestinian Authority. So, and Barack Obama is campaigning on his friendship with Lieberman's former spokesman and chief deputy. How does this happen? How does it happen that the first black president in the United States, when he speaks before AIPAC, says Israel must take its demographic situation into its demographic situation into consideration? How does he echo the rhetoric of white racists in the Jim Crow South? How does he forget that the African American town of Rosewood, that there were plans in Florida to transfer them out of the state? How does he forget this legacy? I don't think he has much of a choice. He's playing in the atmosphere that he found himself in, which is one dominated by the Israel lobby. I mentioned David L. Cohen earlier, VP of Comcast, who raised $1.2 million for Obama in one night. Do you remember seeing when Barack Obama appeared at the Apollo Theater and sang Al Green? Let's stay together, and everyone cheered, and it was all over the news. That same night, right afterwards, right after that event, where he wasn't a fundraiser, it was all hype for the people, Obama gets into a limo, rushes to Midtown, gets into a living room filled with what Haaretz calls powerful pro-Israel donors, and promises to enact biting sanctions against Iran. Says all options are on the table and raises $300,000. And he's done that time after time. And the U.S. media isn't reporting it. It's the Israeli media, usually Haaretz, that reports on this. When I was at Berkeley, a week before I came, Barney Frank, who is known as one of the most liberal members of Congress, the first openly gay member of Congress, came to campus for a counter event against Israel Apartheid Week. Here's what Barney Frank's sister Ann Lewis, who was the former spokesperson for the Democratic National Committee, had to say. The role of the presidents of the United States is to support decisions made by the people of Israel. Really? Well, I mean, to call her an Israel firster would be anti-Semitic. For her to act like an Israel firster would be to embody an anti-Semitic stereotype. So I won't do that. But then you have the key funder of the Democratic National Committee who funded the construction of their headquarters, Haim Saban, who made his fortune with the cartoon Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, who was the largest single individual contributor to President Bill Clinton. He's a major Democratic funder who said, I'm a single issue guy. My issue is Israel. Again, to call him an Israel firster would be anti-Semitic. So I wish he would stop acting like one. You have, Elizabeth Warren. You're all familiar with Elizabeth Warren. She's like the hero of the progressive movement right now, and sort of justifiably so for what she's saying about consumer protection and inequality. But I went on her website and just thought, I wonder what she said, what her foreign policy is like. Her national security page on her website, over half of it is devoted to Israel. It's like there's no other issue. And now, Israel is not actually a foreign policy issue, it's a domestic issue. So she ignores Russia, she ignores China, she ignores Latin America, no mention of Africa. It's all Israel. I will work to oppose a Palestinian state at the UN and impose biting sanctions on Iran and leave all options on the table. No mention of diplomacy. She's just, this looked like it was mimeographed from AIPAC memos. So you have even the most liberal candidates taking the AIPAC line, which is a pro-war line, and receiving absolutely no pushback. I mean, she's meeting with progressives in their living rooms, and no one's asking her about this. So there's been a debate I want to address quickly about the Israel lobby. There are copies of the book, The Israel Lobby, here. One of the people who challenged the theory of Walton Mearsheimer was Walter Russell Mead, who's sort of a conservative historian, and he said that America's support for Israel stems from shared values and a shared history. And he says, this is a positive history. These are positive values of freedom and democracy. And I want to kind of agree with him without discounting anything else I said about the power of the Israel lobby. But I do want to kind of agree with Walter Russell Mead that Israel and the United States do share values. It's just that they're all the wrong values. Thanks for clapping. So the values are values of settler colonialism. Rick Perry, the current governor of Texas, failed Republican candidate, and I can't remember the third one. Went to Israel on a trip sponsored by an extremist settler group. And he said to his hosts while he was in the West Bank, I understand Israel based on shared values because in Texas we have the Alamo, and in Israel you have Masada. And we all know what the Alamo is. It's where Texan settlers made this quick, heroic final stand, knowing that they would lose, fighting to the last man, knowing that they would all die against the Mexicans. And Masada is a 2nd century AD Roman fortress where Jewish extremists called the Sicarii were actually bandits and terrorists, according to the Jewish scribe and turncoat Josephus, huddled themselves after fleeing Rome and slaughtering fellow Jews at the encampment of Ein Gedi, and then staged a last stand, supposedly, against their Roman besiegers. They committed mass suicide, like the people at Jonestown. Actually, there was a a TV movie about Masada in the 70s, and all the reviewers could talk about was Jonestown. And Masada is sort of a model for Israel. Up until recently, Israeli soldiers took their initiation rites at the fortress of Masada. I was taken there on my birthright trip. Benjamin Netanyahu calls Elazar Ben Yair, who is the commander of the Sicarii, the extremist terrorist band that occupied Masada, a hero and a model for world Judaism. So you have these shared values. Michael Oren, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, who was born in the United States, was an American citizen for a long time, received an award in the Colorado legislature last year. And they signed a resolution declaring their unshakable bond with Israel. And what Oren said in his speech in accepting the award was, we have shared values, we have common goals, we are both frontier societies. This is in Denver. What happened in Denver in 1863? At the Apollo Theater in Denver, packed house, 100 scalps from the Arapaho Sioux were paraded on stage to a cheering crowd celebrating General Shivington's massacre of the Native American Indians at Sand Creek. And these are the values of a frontier society, which feels like it's besieged as it's committing ethnic cleansing. The key difference between Israel and the United States on this account, and you can understand this through the work of Thomas Mann in his book, The Dark Side of Democracy, where he explains the connection between democracy and ethnic cleansing, which I discussed before in terms of the Palestinians, citizens being the victims of democracy, is that the United States essentially finished the job after suppressing the last vestige of resistance, which was Geronimo in Arizona, who they eventually deported, transferred to Florida. And now we have sports teams like the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins, and they're objects of our fun and games, and we have Apache helicopters. In Israel, they don't have sports teams named after Palestinians. It's deadly serious there because the Palestinians remain steadfast. They have sumud, they resist, and they stay. And because of people like you who are leveraging international law and equal rights, the United States managed to complete the job of ethnic cleansing because this was before the era of international law, before the era of rights. And one of the things I would point out to Norman Finkelstein, who says we should only strictly use the language of international law, is that if you look at the South African situation, when did all the apartheid resolutions start to appear in the UN? Norman Finkelstein calls BDS a cult. He denounces the boycott. How did those appear? The United States actually attacked these resolutions to make apartheid a human rights crime. It was through the cultural boycott. It was through the economic boycott, but mainly the cultural boycott of South Africa that enough world pressure was created to introduce these resolutions and create these laws. And apartheid, ban of apartheid at the UN was not directed at South Africa specifically. It was directed at apartheid. So these laws still stand, and they're a great threat to Israel. That's why we hear the rhetoric of delegitimization, which is actually the exposure of what is not legitimate about Israel, because Israel, as a Jewish state, has no international legal basis. Can anyone name any international legal basis for Israel as a Jewish exclusivist state? What Zionists will tell you is that the basis is UN Resolution 181, the partition, they say, the Palestinians rejected the partition. Well, of course they rejected the partition. Every indigenous people that's being colonized will reject having their land divided with a colonial population and giving most of their land and their ports to that colonial population. But if you look at what Resolution 181 provided, it provided a binational state. One area was 100% Palestinian Arab. This is one part of the partition. The other area was 55% Jewish, 45% Palestinian Arab. So completely past the threshold, which Israel and the Zionist movement see as a red line. You understand what I'm saying? If they had allowed the partition to pass, then there probably would have never been a Jewish and exclusivist state if it were a democracy, because Palestinians could have elected a Palestinian prime minister or a non-Zionist prime minister, which necessitated the ethnic cleansing that began in 1948 and was completed after May 15th, 1948. So there was no legal basis in Resolution 181. There's no legal basis in the Balfour Declaration, which Zionists always talk about. The Balfour Declaration only declares the British colonial power, that the British colonial power looks with favor upon a Jewish homeland. Israel actually was forced to accept Resolution 194, which provides for the right of return of Palestinian refugees as a condition of entering the UN General Assembly. They promised at the Lausanne Conference in 1949 to accept the Palestinian right of return under pressure from Harry Truman, who is always presented as this great defender and advocate of Zionism. Truman, I don't know if Truman ever accepted officially the concept of a Jewish exclusivist state. And what they did by accepting this is they openly lied. And Norman Finkelstein, in his attack on BDS, leaves out Resolution 194 entirely. But this is sort of at the heart of what BDS is about. Let me talk about the election and move into Iran before we do some Q&A. I talked about the Democrats, but the Republicans, I mean, they're so colorful and so fascinating. I especially love Rick Santorum, who I covered for a long time. Rick Santorum recently said America is under the control of Satan. He said that Satan will use what he calls smart people and sensuality to attack America. So I think this room would be an epicenter of demonic possession. Santorum is, the Republican establishment sees Santorum as essentially unelectable, and they favor Mitt Romney. That's well known. But it's the neocons who really favor Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney has 22 former members of the George W. Bush foreign policy team on his staff. He has 6 members of the Project for a New American Century, which is the umbrella group that made the case for an attack on Iraq, on his foreign policy team. His chief foreign policy advisor, who I profiled for Al-Akhbar, is Elliot Cohen, who wrote the white paper for Romney's foreign policy. This is a guy who's called for the use of a combination of soft and hard power to create regime change in Iran, who says the United States is currently in World War IV, and was a founding member of the Project for a New American Century. And so you have Sheldon Adelson. You've heard this name before. He's the 8th richest man in America. He is, I wouldn't call him an Israel firster. I would just say that he said that he's proud that his grandson is joining the Israeli army, and he wishes that he had joined the Israeli army instead of the U.S. Army during World War II. It would be anti-Semitic to call him an Israel firster. He's a key funder of Benjamin Netanyahu. He is a close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. He funds a newspaper and owns a newspaper in Israel called Israel Hayom, which is known as Netanyahu's house organ, his propaganda sheet. He funds the Shalom Center, which provides Netanyahu with many of the advisors of his National Security Council. And Sheldon Adelson is the only major donor to Newt Gingrich's campaign. It's the only reason why Gingrich is in the campaign. He's funding Gingrich's super PAC. Gingrich can't win. So why does he keep giving Gingrich money? Remember, Gingrich said the Palestinians are an invented people, and then he received $5 million the following day from Sheldon Adelson, who said Gingrich was right before a delegation of birthright Israel kids in Israel. But he keeps giving Gingrich money even though Gingrich can't win. It's because Gingrich takes votes away from Santorum, and splits the right-wing base. and the neocons see Santorum as unelectable, and he clears the path for Romney to win. It was because of this that Romney was able to eke out a victory in Michigan yesterday. And if he had lost in Michigan, he may have been doomed. This was his home state. And then so we have to see Adelson as sort of acting on behalf of Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants Romney to win. Netanyahu wants to effect regime change in two countries, Iran and the United States. He wants to overthrow Barack Obama with a neoconservative, somewhat like a wooden marionette puppet like Romney, who surrounded himself with neoconservatives who will do his bidding on Iran, because Israel cannot actually take out Iran's nuclear facilities, which possibly require bunker busters or tactical nuclear weapons. And Israel is right now trying to convince the world that it can do it. They don't want anyone to call their bluff. Israel doesn't have in-air refueling capacity like the United States. So they need the U.S. to do their work, their dirty work on Iran. So Bibi is using Adelson, leveraging Gingrich to get Romney in there. And I mentioned Elliot Cohen. One of his former pupils, his disciples, is the director of Israeli military intelligence, Aviv Kohavi. So the connection between Tel Aviv and the Romney campaign is seamless. Where does Ron Paul fit into all this? Ron Paul has been the key critic of the neocons in the campaign. Ron Paul has been the first person in my lifetime to challenge the special relationship with Israel on a national platform. Ron Paul is also the only candidate who has not attacked Mitt Romney once. He's attacking Santorum, mainly, but not Romney. Even in debates, he's never attacked Romney. Newt Gingrich has called Ron Paul out and said, "You have some secret deal with Romney," and I think he does. So, ironically, the key critic of the neocon has become, has empowered the major neocon in the race. And we'll see that play out at convention time. So AIPAC, this national conference, is coming up this weekend. And we're going to see Netanyahu possibly make the case for a U.S. strike on Iran. I'm not sure what Obama will say. Haaretz has just reported that Netanyahu will ask Obama if he will attack Iran. What would happen if the U.S. refused to attack Iran, but Israel went rogue and attacked Iran in May or June? You'd see a rallying around the flag of the president for about 2 months. Then the bottom would fall out of the economy. President Obama would find himself under attack for letting the economic recovery be destroyed, and at the same time for failing to show strength in the face of the enemies of Western civilization. So an Israeli attack on Iran would boost the chances of a Republican candidate getting in office. And already the sanctions on Iran, which have caused gas prices to go up, which caused oil prices and food prices to go up, are helping the Republicans. John Boehner, the Speaker of the House of the Republican Party, has issued a memo to all his members telling them to attack Obama on the basis of high gas prices. So these sanctions suggest that Netanyahu's second target might also be the U.S. economy, because it helps and weaken Obama and embolden the neocons. And the next round of AIPAC legislation will ask Congress to move the red lines for an attack on Iran. In other words, making an attack inevitable. They've already passed through Congress legislation which bans diplomacy between the White House and Iran, preventing them from meeting with any Iranian officials without the permission of Congress, which is under the complete control of AIPAC. It's passed 100 to nothing. So I can't say an attack on Iran is coming. It just seems like Obama has been overwhelmed by what I consider to be Netanyahu's shadow war. And we have to understand this push for war with Iran as seamless with everything else that I've discussed, and to see the work that you guys are doing on the ground here on campus and in Israel-Palestine as connected to the anti-war movement, to creating a wall, to changing the discussion on this war, and to creating some kind of counter-narrative. So the importance of BDS goes far beyond Israel-Palestine. And so you don't let anyone say you're singling Israel out. On that account, I guess I'll open up for questions, and apologize if I went too long. Let's not no comments.
Hey, so I'm going to Occupy APAC this weekend probably, or definitely, and I'm wondering what you think would be useful tactics to use in that situation. Just because I guess I'm worried that protesting such an organization that's already obviously very much compelled at what they're doing might just be get deaf ears.
I mean, if we have enough time, I can show my video from last year's APAC, which showed the effective tactics of Code Pink. I'm not like a tactician, but I just think that the narrative this year is so, I mean, this Occupy APAC this year, I can't make it, although I was invited to speak, is so important because Amit mentioned that APAC had pushed the U.S. into war with Iraq, and I'm not sure I totally agree with that. APAC came out late in the game to support the war in Iraq, but in this case, APAC is directly pushing the U.S. to war with Iran on behalf of Israel against American interests, and I think I've tried to establish that it harms the American economy, it's hurting working class and middle class Iranians and hardening the Iranian regime, and it's hurting working class and middle class Americans, and it's being pushed by people who, if I were to call them Israel firsters, I'd be anti-Semitic, so they should stop being them. And people like Sheldon Adelson, people like Haim Saban. So you have an easy case to make to the American public, the media is afraid to make it, that AIPAC is trying to get the U.S. to fight Israel's war. And there's an old joke that the definition of a neocon is an Israel supporter who wants Christian soldiers to fight Israel's wars. And it's kind of like has anti-Semitic undertones, but in this case, that's being fulfilled, and it compelled Keith Weitzman, the former researcher at AIPAC, to remark to journalist Robert Dreyfus that he fears that this war will incite massive anti-Semitism because it will be seen as the Jews' war. And that's something that really troubles me, because what AIPAC is doing is so naked and so in the open and so on behalf of Israel against U.S. interests, against what the Pentagon is saying. Let's not do this war. This is crazy. And they're deploying everything at their disposal to do it. So I think you have an easy case to make, although it's a very sensitive case to make. So that, we have to be careful about the language we use. But what we did, AIPAC last year, what Medea Benjamin from Code Pink did was create like a stand for speakers, and she let anyone speak. So they would have like Palestinian activists speak, and a lot of Palestinians would get up and tell their story, their family story. And then these kids from AIPAC, who were like very privileged, wealthy kids, would come up and scream at them. And one young woman, who I talked to afterwards, she's a wealthy girl from the Upper East Side, she said to the faces of these diaspora Palestinians, Palestinian refugees, she said, "We won the war, you lost, it's our land, shut up." And getting that on film was very effective in exposing the kind of racism and eliminationist mentality that AIPAC depends on and encourages.
We can show the film, it's just, let's keep going to Q&A and we'll work on it.
If anyone has lives to get.
Hi. I guess one of the claims that the Zionists make in favor of the Jewish state is that there's this historical continuum of persecution of Jews. And I was just wondering if you see the charges that you level against the Israeli state of being racist and ethnically cleansing, etc. Do you see, if those charges get followed through, changes are actually brought into being, do you see any threat to the Jewish people today to heightened anti-Semitism, repeats of past events of persecution? I don't know how to phrase this.
No, I mean, it's a big question. It's like one of the big questions. And you have to go back to the writings of the early Zionists, like Herzl, who said he seeks to change the character of the Jew who is obsessed with money. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he accepts an anti-Semitic critique of Jews in Europe, and Zionism in general accepts the anti-Semitic critique. There's no place for Jews in the world, so they have to create this separate Jewish ghetto which replicates European life, but in what they considered to be a wilderness at that time. And so Zionism is sort of the flip side of anti-Semitism. It's why Zionists were able to enter into negotiations, the transfer agreement, the Havara agreement, with the Third Reich, to transfer Jewish property into Palestine and Jewish people into Palestine. There's so much literature on this, and yet it hasn't been discussed very much. Why were they able to enter into these negotiations? This is the labor establishment of Zionism, not the right wing. Because the Nazis wanted Jews out and the Zionists wanted Jews in, so they had mutual interests. Adolf Eichmann was taken on a tour of kibbutzim. This is Adolf Eichmann, who was later sentenced to death in Jerusalem. And he negotiated with Feibel Folkes, who is a double Haganah, in other words, a double Zionist army and Nazi agent. Eichmann's boss, Leopold von Wildenstein, who was the head of the Office of Jewish Affairs for the Third Reich, was taken on a tour of kibbutzim. He praised the revisionist Zionists and returned to his office in Berlin playing Hebrew folk music. He was presented with a medal with a swastika on one side and a Jewish star on the other side by the Zionist movement. Teddy Kollek, the future mayor of Jerusalem, negotiated personally with Adolf Eichmann. When Eichmann was captured by Mossad agents in Argentina, he spoke Hebrew, spoke some conversational Hebrew, because he had engaged in these negotiations. After the war, Israel, when they took the big payoff from Germany for the Holocaust, they negotiated with Hans Globka, who was involved in transferring Jews to concentration camps and was never prosecuted for it. So they were always advancing their interests against the interests of world Jewry. They called the diaspora the galut, which is sort of a negative term they would say that I'm a galuti, that I have like a lower mentality than they do, because I'm pretty comfortable living here. And so you have Israel, negotiating with anti-Semites, continuing their relationship with anti-Semites. Today, an Israeli Knesset member named Ayub Kara, who's actually Druze, went to Austria and met with people who are from the Austrian Freedom Party, which is a neo-Nazi party. You have lots and lots of ties between pro-Israel elements in England and the English Defense League, which is a neo-Nazi inspired group, and they now wave Israeli flags at their rallies, and this is over the unity between Zionists and the racist right over the hatred of Muslims. But at the same time, with Israel carrying out ethnic cleansing, maintaining a settler colonial model in the heart of the Arab world, they inspire Arab anti-Semitism, which takes on different forms. The Arab world is the key vehicle for anti-Semitism in the world today. Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a top seller in Egypt. This is a response to Zionism. And so in that respect, Zionism is keeping anti-Semitism alive. It's the key catalyst for anti-Semitism. And when Benjamin Netanyahu comes out and says that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem in the 1930s was an architect of the final solution, and he just completely lies and distorts history to convince Israeli Jews, that Palestinians are actually Nazis, and that when they're shooting a Palestinian, they're shooting Hitler. He furthers that. He perpetuates the existence of anti-Semitism and the Jewish siege mentality, which is incredibly damaging. In fact, even Tzipi Livni, the Israeli opposition leader, said Netanyahu has turned Israel into the largest ghetto in the world. So, to discuss, imagine your question. Your question is about if Israel kind of falls as a Jewish exclusive state, that will do increase anti-Semitism. It's like people always say the one-state scenario will be a nightmare. I say right now it's already a nightmare. And the longer this goes on, the more they push for these wars, the more anti-Semitism is encouraged, the more this crisis, this moral freefall in the Jewish community deepens, and there has to be an intervention. And those of you who are Jewish, you're young, you have older relatives in your family, communal elders telling you, you're a traitor, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You have to look them in the face and say, we're just cleaning up your mess. We're just staging an intervention and we're on a rescue mission. And there's a few of us now, but you have to just look back in history and recognize that the prophetic voice of Judaism is older than Tel Aviv and it's older than Zionism. And that's the voice we have to listen to. I'll try to keep my answers more brief.
Who else?
What's the difference between the apartheid in Israel and the apartheid in South Africa?
That's a good question. There was a flyer distributed that laid out some of the similarities, and two friends of mine have produced a documentary which will come out, which I think you should show next year at your Israel Apartheid Week event. It's called Roadmap to Apartheid. You can see a preview online. And this is one of the most comprehensive documentations of the similarities between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel. But there are two key differences to me. And I say apartheid Israel, it's almost impossible to define it in the same way as apartheid South Africa. There are two key differences. One, South Africa created these Bantustans, which are like the population centers in the West Bank, which Israel wants to be the future of a Palestinian representative entity. Yitzhak Rabin, right before he was assassinated, in the Knesset, he said, what we're doing with the Oslo Accords is trying to create an entity that is less than a state. Those are his words. He wanted to create Bantustans, which are just population centers surrounded by settlements. South Africa, and by the way, the South African Bantustans, when they sought recognition, only one country in the world recognized them, like Botswana, Botswana. Only one country recognized it was the state of Israel. There were intimate connections there. But South Africa never bombed its Bantustans. It never flew F-16s over its Bantustans and killed massive amounts of civilians. They used counterinsurgency tactics, but they didn't use what Israel calls asymmetrical warfare, which is based on the idea of what I mentioned before, that Palestinians are economically superfluous, that they need to be controlled at all times by drones and controlled from the outside, and that those who are considered militants or dangerous can be not prosecuted in a court, but eliminated through targeted assassination. And that's Israel's policy to Gaza, is to control it completely from the outside. So Israel technically doesn't control the interior of Gaza, it controls everything on the outside. But to run a prison, how much do you need to control if you're the prison authorities? You only need 1 or 2%. You only need guard towers, the exterior, and you send your people in if there's a riot. And so that's, I think that's one of the key differences. And so when you have this area which is treated like a prison, it's quarantined, they're not able to have an economy. Their unemployment rate has gone up near 50%. Israel, the Israeli human rights NGO, Gisha, has shown by subpoena and documents from the Israeli Civil Administration and Defense Department that Israel uses complex mathematical formulas to calculate the amount of calories each person in the Gaza Strip is able to take in a day. Israel bans size A2 paper to the Gaza Strip, so I guess they can't make terrorist paper airplanes. South Africa never did that, so what they're doing is putting people in these ghettos and then depriving them of the opportunity to work or do anything. They're warehousing them. The South African apartheid regime put black Africans in ghettos in order to maintain them as a cheap labor force. But Israel has always sought to isolate Palestinians and warehouse them. They even had a phrase for it early on during the early Zionist era called Kibush HaAvodah, which is the conquest of Hebrew labor. And it required, first and foremost, a boycott of Arab labor. That's why Mahmoud Darwish and now Omar Barghouti are compelling the BDS movement to besiege the besieger, to boycott the world's ultimate boycotter.
But you should also elaborate that in South Africa, the Africans were controlled by minority white people.
Right.
Israel, it's totally different.
Well, yeah, Israel, between the river and the to see, according to the Israeli demographer known as Arnon, the Arab counter, so fair by his colleagues, is between the river and the sea is 50%, 52% Jewish. So if we see the Israeli regime as everyone under Israeli control, rather than those who are technically citizens of Israel and those who aren't, it is approaching pretty much an apartheid, a South African apartheid state. Another thing to point to is the Inkatha Freedom Party in South Africa, which is a collaborationist Zulu element, which was funded by apartheid, the apartheid intelligence agencies, and the Palestinian Authority, which is used for almost the same reason as an occupation subcontractor, and which is completely subservient to Israel in the West. If it's defunded by Israel in the West, it ceases to exist, and they are used to control the Bantustan's. They do most of the imprisonment, most of the arrests of Palestinian dissidents and Palestinian militants and those who are outlawed. And Mahmoud Abbas had advance warning of Operation Cast Lead, pretty much said nothing. So until there is an ANC-like government in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, I think the BDS movement is fundamentally limited in its call for rights.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that Romney would most likely be a puppet for the Israelites in power. Do you think that Obama is playing that role now?
You mean the neoconservatives?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the neoconservatives, I would have to distinguish them from the Israel lobby. They're a little bit more radical than the Israel lobby on a lot of issues. And so I think Romney is a neocon puppet, and Obama is going to do the bidding of AIPAC, which is actually closer to the political center in Washington than the neoconservatives, who would be willing to wildly wage a military strike on Iran or fund sort of an assassination program inside Iran. They're actually a little bit more rogue. And yeah, I mean, I think I've pretty much established that Obama is going to give AIPAC what it wants. One of the things it wants is to continue using the peace process and negotiations between the Palestinian Authority and Israel as an avenue for allowing Israel to create more facts on the ground. In other words, while negotiations go on to build more and more settlements, and then keep this Palestinian Authority in power, which is sort of an occupation subcontractor. So the whole point of recognizing that is to emphasize the importance of BDS, not just the people who are natural supporters of Palestinian solidarity, but to tell people from J Street to challenge them, to challenge people who are liberal Zionists. What are you doing to pressure Israel? Like, you know they need to be pressured. That's the whole basis of the process. So what are you doing? Meretz USA, which is the arm of this left-wing Zionist party in Israel, this dying left-wing Zionist party, has endorsed a boycott of products in the occupied territories because they recognize there is no peace process. It's dead. We have to do something. And so, but then you have to just point out that those who are trying to call for boycotts of the occupied territories inside Israel face punishments and criminal penalties and threats from government ministers and even theater actors who refuse to perform in a theater in the occupied West Bank. Last year, were threatened by the Israeli culture minister, who more than not, who attempted to pass legislation to force them to play at the theater. So the question has to be, if they refuse to recognize, if they see the West Bank and Israel as all one state, then why should we make a different distinction when we call for full BDS? And so that's really the situation that AIPAC has created.
Other questions? If we were to call Romney and Neocon and Obama a realist, what would be a realist response to an Israeli airstrike
Obama is not a realist. He's sort of like a liberal interventionist.
Okay. What would be Obama's, or what would be a realist reaction to an Israeli airstrike?
A realist reaction to allow that to happen means that the president has sort of abdicated his role as a world leader, because the United States is, from a realist perspective, supposed to be a superpower that keeps its allies from acting against its interests. And so if Israel has gone that far, it means that the president is not a realist, that he's overwhelmed by some kind of rogue domestic lobby, and that's where Obama finds himself. So a realist president would sanction Israel, or militarily sanction Israel for doing something like that so badly damages American interests in the world. A realist, the foreign policy realist school, thinks of American interests first. Walt and Mearsheimer, who wrote the Israel-Lobby, are realists, and so consequently they're attacked as anti-Semites. And we have to recognize that the Republican Party's foreign policy establishment used to be controlled by realists. And they were forced out by the neocons after the first George Bush administration. Like Brent Scowcroft and Jim Baker, who were George Bush's first two key foreign policy heads, were realists. And they actually trained Condoleezza Rice, who became Bush's Secretary of State, and she was overwhelmed by the neocons, and also overwhelmed by her strange love for George W. Bush, this weird kind of affair that they had, emotional affair that they had. So, I mean, your question is very hypothetical. As long as the Israel lobby remains so influential and is dominant in the Senate, we will never have a realist president, which means we'll never have a president fully acting on behalf of purely American interests. And that doesn't really bode well for American empire. I'm not a fan of American empire, in case you noticed, but realists, I think, would be the most effective stewards of American empire.
Other question?
Does anyone know why, question, the first joke, why Israel doesn't ask for, why Israel doesn't ask for U.S. statehood? Yeah, that's the joke. Right. You say it louder?
They only have 2 senators.
Yeah, they only have 2 senators. Yeah.
My name is Mujahid, and I actually come from Palestine, from a very small village called Masha. Probably have visited that village if you were ever in the West Bank.
I don't know if I have.
No.
What is it? What's this?
What's special about it, there's this family that was captured within the wall, a Handy family. There's a big film about it. Like 90% of the farms were taken by the wall.
It's like Walajay, right?
Yeah. But there's some of the villages around us that has the same basic experience. My question, and this is like really very genuine and doesn't have to do so much with facts and truths. It has to do with just the humanity aspect of the conflict. As a Palestinian, who is like in this room, one of my best friends, Sagiv, who's sitting just behind me. And Sagiv comes from a settlement that is 20 minutes away from the village. And I appreciate him so much as a friend. And probably like in the last 3-4 weeks, I have spoken to him more than anybody else at work. I'm just like really interested in what kind of relationship you see between me and Sagiv.
Well, a member of the Palestinian Authority was asked by a neoconservative journalist during the run-up to the UN statehood bid, what will happen to the settlers? And he basically said, there will be no Jews allowed in the West Bank if we have this 2-state solution. So he's basically calling for kind of an ethnic cleansing of Jews, but it will be carried out by the Israeli army, which would never do something like that. And I would like to put into place a different vision, the same vision that actually Rabbi Menachem Froman, who lives in the occupied territories, and who's a rabbi who's leading the yeshiva there, puts into place, which is that Jews are free to live in the West Bank as equal citizens with Palestinians in a 1-state scenario, which means they get to live near the religious sites, they get to go to Hebron and be near Abraham's birthplace. But they can't do that with the protection of thousands of soldiers making life a living hell for Palestinians. I'm sure you've been to H2 in Hebron. It's like walking into a nightmare. And it's so these people can maintain a Jewish exclusivist lifestyle instead of living as neighbors. So I'm not a big fan of, throwing all the settlers out in a two-state agreement, which will never happen anyway. It's just a question of calling on people to live as neighbors, and fine, they can live in exclusivist communities too, but they can't dominate other communities. They can't dominate their water. They can't dominate their electricity. They can't, for example, when me and Amit met in Safa, there was a settlement in Bat Ain at the top of the hill, and they're dumping all their sewage down into this olive grove. And Bat Ain has a yeshiva which is famous around the world for their teachings on the Torah. But they should be able to have that yeshiva there, but they can't be dumping the waste down into Palestinians' olive gardens into their olive fields, so that they can't farm and maintain the lifestyle that they've maintained for hundreds of years. The other thing that's never talked about is the concept of the Levantine Bridge. That there's a huge element in Israel that's known as Mizrahim, Oriental Jews, who are actually Arab Jews, who have a common culture and language with Palestinian Arabs, and who have been torn apart from Palestinian Arabs through Zionism, been forced to prove their loyalty to an Ashkenazi elite. Whenever you see these dialogue groups, these fake dialogue groups, which substitute, which are used now wielded against BDS, it's always Palestinian Arabs and Ashkenazi Jews. They're never Mizrahim whose parents spoke Arabic and put into those dialogue groups. They're never able, Palestinians are never told, and Jews are never told, that the greatest Jewish mind, religious mind who ever lived, Maimonides, what language did he write in? He wrote in Arabic. He lived in Cairo. I mean, these facts need to come out too if there's going to be a reconciliation process. The problem is that we wrongly see the peace camp in Israel as the Ashkenazi elite. And these are people like Yossi Beilin, the former head of the Meretz party, who said, I have absolutely, and he's seen as this great peacemaker, this great negotiator. He said, I have no interest in living in Israel if it's no longer a Jewish state. So compare that with my Mizrahi friends who say, I have no interest in Zionism, but for now I'm going to join the army because this is where I've been forced to live, and my father runs a store here. And consider that they might be able to continue doing business there and maybe be happy in a non-Zionist scenario. I don't know if that answers your question.
If you just allow me to add a comment.
Yeah.
I think my biggest problem until now with BDS and with the whole apartheid campaign is that, and as somebody personally appreciates very deep human connections, and I see so much value in that, is that the BDS and the apartheid campaign really suck all the humanity from both in a very deep level. And I think we are in a time, as someone who lived in Palestine, we are in a time that is very dangerous for both people. And to call for boycott and divestment and sanctions and to separate people, it just makes it much more dangerous. I think we're in a time in history in which if you want to do something good, more people will try to bridge them more towards understanding each other. And I do not think, I think we're in a very risky place in Israel and Palestine, and especially with the issue of Iran right now, that if you just call for more separation, you're really advancing the situation to become extremely dangerous towards reaching that state of global war. So I just wish there was an alternative, like a human alternative, a dialogue alternative that's very inclusive, that really makes people look into each other, look at their faces, establish very deep friendships, and out of that come to something that's really, really beautiful.
I mean, it's up to people to do that, and BDS provides an avenue for that to happen, which actually aims to change the physical reality in Israel, which is based on violent demographic separation. And so you can't have dialogue groups and normalization underneath violent demographic separation without advocating for some kind of mechanism of changing the physical reality so that you guys can be neighbors on an equal basis. We have to remember that one of the key targets of the South African, of the African National Committee, Congress, and Nelson Mandela's cultural boycott was Springboks. It was a segregated rugby team that was really the symbol of Afrikaner nationalism. And they basically isolated them, prevented them from playing everywhere in the world. And then Springboks attempted to capitulate and said, we'll have one black player on the team. And they said, no, we want full integration, we want the end of apartheid. And so what happened when apartheid ended was there was massive pressure on Nelson Mandela to change Springboks' name or eliminate the team altogether. And instead, with this integrated team, he took Springboks and made it a symbol of the new South Africa, because he understood we have to recognize the institutions and the national pride and the essential humanity of those who colonized us, who actually were fleeing from persecution themselves. And so what my vision is, and I think this is the vision of BDS, but I don't think BDS is a panacea. It could go all wrong. I just don't see any other recourse. What my vision is this moves towards a real peace process, just like the one that Nelson Mandela advocated, where he said, I'm not going to sit down with my oppressor until we negotiate the end of apartheid. And that process leads to a process of reconciliation, not a process of ethnic cleansing.
I want to say one thing. Personally, I feel that if BDS at all finds legitimacy behind their actions, and you find that there's a resistance behind you, you should advance and keep going forward. Especially if you find that the Israeli administration is against you, you should keep going. But I don't think there should be a division. And secondly, I just want to correct that. In an apartheid regime, the minority, the whites, were not fleeing persecution. In 1880s Russia, pogroms, Poland, fleeing persecution. There's a little difference.
Well, the Afrikaners, I'll leave the argument aside, but I'll leave it aside because it's too peripheral.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you a bit more about your sort of one-state proposal here. You seem to sort of be of an understanding that there is a violent separation, that something needs to be done about it. And also sort of citing Nelson Mandela, who, well, may I correct, he was meeting in prison during apartheid with some of these leaders beforehand, sort of speaking Afrikaans, understanding their history and sort of using Springboks and understanding the national cultural importance of it. So if you see that and that how that happened in South Africa, and you're saying there should be no Jewish state, and there shouldn't be two states, I don't really understand how you are sort of grasping the importance of what Mandela did and not advocating it here.
Well, Mandela would have rejected the concept of two states, which Israel has never recognized. As I said, Israel wanted an entity that is less than a state in order to be its equal being. And I can talk for the next 2 hours about how Israel has worked to foil contiguous, viable Palestinian state. And no colonized population would have agreed to a partition along demographic or racial lines. So, I mean, on a principle, I oppose that, but we have to accept reality. And the reality is, and also I'm not a one-state ideologue, I'm somewhat agnostic, but I have to look at the reality that it already is a de facto one state. You have up to 650,000 Jewish settlers living in exclusive Jewish communities in the West Bank. I'm talking about cities. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Ariel or Malay Adunim, but these, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're in Southern California when you're in the middle of Ariel. Ariel is a mega settlement that is considered like, it's called a suburb of Jerusalem, but it's really not. It cuts deep into the heart of the West Bank, into the Salfit district. It sits on top of the Palestinian aquifer. It's just established economic settlers. They're not really ideologues. They now have a university, which Israel is trying to officially recognize. They have a gleaming theater, which Israel is trying to bring into its national theater program. They have a sports center funded by Pastor John Hagee, who you saw in my Christian Zionist video, and Junk Bond great swimming pool while people are starved of water in the fields below. And this is part of the settlement blocks. Look at all of the agreements, or all of the peace process proposals, including the Geneva Initiative, which is put forward by J Street and the liberal Zionist groups. It calls for Israel to keep Male Adumim, Ariel, and the settlement blocks, which were positioned there strategically to separate the Palestinians in the West Bank from Jerusalem, so Israel can annex all of Jerusalem. And so you look at that and you say, how can two states even be possible anymore? Israel has separate highways for the settlers to drive to get easy access to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and it has it has the separation wall. The Supreme Court validated the separation wall's annexation of 180,000 dwelings of privately owned Palestinian land. And Tzipi Livni has said it doesn't take a dummy. This is the opposition leader of Israel, head of the Kingdom Party. It doesn't take a dummy to realize the separation wall is where our future borders will be. Then you have to think about the fact that over 40% of the officer corps in the Israeli army are religious nationalists who are either settlers or sympathetic with settlers, and that number goes up every year. And there are thousands and thousands of soldiers who have pledged publicly to refuse to evacuate settlements. So how could the settlers be evacuated? Which would be a horrible scene to begin with. It's not going to happen. So you have to just think, is there an alternative? Do we accept that there's an alternative? Okay, let's just make a basic alternative. Let's say Palestinians have the right to live in Ariel, go to Ariel University, and benefit from the institutions that Israel has created, and benefit Israel by civilizing Israel in the eyes of the world. The civil rights movement boycotted the Jim Crow South. Before the Civil Rights Act, there were no professional sports teams. There were very few professional sports teams in the Deep South. There were no Atlanta Hawks. There were no Atlanta Braves. There were no New Orleans Saints. This was the legacy of Martin Luther King of civilizing the South. And so I think this should be the legacy of BDS, is civilizing Israel and lifting it up by removing this Jewish exclusivist shell, this settler colonial shell. And it's really the only alternative at this point. I mean, every week, new settlements are authorized while we keep talking about what's our solution. So I think we should be even focused on solutions as much as a process to enable justice.
Just a quick follow-up. How do you get rid of the mentality of a desire for a Jewish state, if that's what you're proposing?
Yeah,
I think that's strong as well.
I mean, again, it's like you're asking really important questions that are difficult to answer. We just have to look at the reality on the ground, which is that in the Zionist school system, in the Israeli school system, there's massive indoctrination going on. So much that a group of teachers in Tel Aviv, public high school teachers, issued a letter to the education minister, Gideon Sar, asking him to intervene on their behalf because they can no longer teach with so much racism in the classroom. Over 50% of Israeli high schoolers have said they would prefer to not have to have Arab students in the classroom with them. I mean, over 50% of Israeli high school students have said they prioritize the Jewish aspect of the state over the democratic aspect of the state. You just look at the Israeli Democracy Institute's polls of Israeli youth, and you see the kind of minds that they're forming in the Zionist system, and you have to propose some kind of alternative. And the alternative is remove the Jewish exclusivist structure and start teaching them civics, start teaching them like real Jewish history. My friend Alex Cohen, who lives in Tel Aviv, who was one of the Shministim, one of the 20 people who refused to serve in the Israeli army on ideological grounds in 2010, who went to jail for 30 days. I could show you a video of him talking about this, but he said, I learned absolutely nothing in school except being enslaved in Egypt, the Holocaust, and being attacked by the Arabs. This was like my history education, and the whole point of this education was to guide me into the army. So when you have a system of full conscription, where every Jewish kid is seen as a potential soldier, you are damaging the Jewish mind, and it's another reason why I support BDS and oppose Jewish nationalism, because it's an attack on Jewish youth and the Jewish mind and the Talmudic tradition of questioning. Sorry?
Walter Rosenstein happens to teach it.
Oh, I didn't know that. I wish he'd come tonight.
You weren't realistic.
Well, I don't know if anyone paid attention here, how many people paid attention to Norman Finkelstein's attack on the BDS movement. But this is, you know, one of the... Oh, it's okay. I don't need to have that. Unless you enjoy looking at it. No, Finkelstein has really been like one of the key academic figures associated with the movement for Palestinian rights, although I never really felt comfortable with the kind of rhetoric he used. I remember the first time I ever saw him speak was right after he had gone to Gaza after Operation Cast Lead. He was at this community center in New York, and I walk in and he's banging the podium and saying, Israel is a satanic state! Israel is a satanic state! I'm like, who is this guy? This is not helpful. And I would have challenged him, and I would have said that's completely false. Satan doesn't exist. But he uses inflammatory rhetoric often. He's kind of destructive. I was on a panel with him at the American Muslims for Palestine National Conference, and he got up to give a talk. Instead of giving a talk on American-Israel relations, he gave a big talk on what a fool John Mearsheimer was, and how he was wrong about the Jewish neocons. He kept saying, the Jewish neocons got us into the war with Iraq, and I challenged him on that, and I said there's a convergence of interests, and he was very inflammatory. He used a lot of hot rhetoric against me and alienated the crowd, and it just seems to me that the BDS movement has kind of eclipsed the cult of Norman Finkelstein. So it's called the BDS movement a cult. And it's, okay, fine, it's a cult, let's make it into a religion. But he was really settling personal scores. There were a lot of BDS people who he famously sabotaged the march he tried to organize to the Gaza Strip. And, I try not to get into this movement to such a degree that I will be settling personal scores or put myself in a leadership position. Beyond that, to lecture to Palestinians, this is a Palestinian movement. BDS was initiated by Palestinian civil society groups, 170 Palestinian civil society groups. And, for me to advocate for BDS means I'm advocating for a Palestinian call. It means it's not really my job to tell Palestinians who are living under occupation how to resist. And I found as much as Norman Finkelstein's achieved, as much as he's been persecuted, he really has no right to behave that arrogantly and preach to people about what size cage they should live in. Yeah.
Okay, so you keep defining what's happening in Israel right now as apartheid, right? And that makes me wonder as for what are you expecting to happen in Israel now? So expecting the Palestinians to be given the country back, rule over Israel again, or just as it happened back in South Africa, black people were given the country back. Are you expecting the Jewish nation to be evacuated out of Israel?
No, and I mean that's a common misconception when people say the BDS movement aims to destroy Israel. They imagine that the BDS movement is really sort of like a front for extremist Islamism and aims to wipe Israel off the map and drive the Jews into the sea. When in fact, I've said over and over that I think the BDS movement will civilize Israel and give those who want to live as neighbors and as equals with Palestinians more legitimacy in the eyes of the world, and hopefully allow them to maintain Jewish religious institutions if they want to, and give them equal protection under the law. So I endorse the vision of Azmi Bashara, who is the founder of the Balad Party, who imagined, who put this vision forward in Israeli society, that the Palestinian citizens of Israel will become a national minority, and that everyone will gain equal rights in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and that those who are forced out of Israel, I don't know if you've seen what it's like in refugee camps in Lebanon. I was able to visit them this summer for the first time, and there people are being warehoused. They're being kept in these walled-in communities that are really like walking into a vision of hell. They're just living on top of each other. They're treated in such a racist way by Lebanese society. Jewish exclusivist structure. I don't think all of them are going to come back to Israel to settle, but they should be able to freely, and then that's going to have to be negotiated, but they should be able to, if they want, and should be able to freely travel to Jerusalem, freely travel around Israel. The fences should come down. So to say that equal rights means the destruction of Israel has to be flipped on its head, and we have to ask, if that's true, what does that say about Israel? And what does that say about the supporters of Israel, that they see equal rights as a form of destruction? And again, that's why they don't want to have that debate. Was I clear about where I'm
I just think Jen just said that the two nations living together is impossible.
impossible?
I'm not sure.
I don't think it's impossible. If I said that, then I must have misspoken because I don't think I said
So
it's
you believe
impossible.
that Jews can live without Palestinians together peacefully?
Well, before Zionism, they did in the Arab world. For hundreds and hundreds of years, they lived together, and it can happen again. And I don't like this whole rhetoric about can Jews and Palestinians, can Jews and Arabs live together. It accepts the unnatural situation that Zionism's created when Jews and Arab Jews have flourished throughout the world for a long time. So we have to reject dialogue groups that seek to that pretend that Jews and Arabs are in a state of natural discord and disharmony. We have so much. We seem to get along pretty well in the United States. If it wasn't for Stand With Us and these groups, I would just say without Zionism, it wouldn't even be an issue. Yeah.
In the Israeli lobby, Walton Mearsheimer mentioned that sort of condemning Israeli policy is almost easier in Israel than it is in the United States. And you mentioned that a lot of the press coverage of what Obama does when he's talking to these large donor, Israeli supporters of AIPAC is covered by Haaretz, their Israeli journalist, news organizations, and not by the American media. And I was wondering if you think that's true. Do you think there's better coverage on more sort of sort of like heightened awareness, an easier dialogue that takes place actually in Israel than it does in the United States?
Yeah, it's such a hard question for me to answer because one day I think that's true and then one day I think it's not true. When I see friends of mine who are active in the boycott from within movement in Israel, like Yonatan Shapira, who is a former Israeli helicopter pilot who organized the pilot's letter of refusal, and he calls me up when I was in Tel Aviv and says, "Meet me." The Shin Bet has called me in for an interrogation. I think, well, maybe it's not so easy to criticize over here. You're being called in for interrogations, or a lot of professors in Israel have been refused tenure, just like here, just like what happened with Joel Koval at Bard. And even worse, where did that not happen, or am I getting that wrong? Yeah? Okay, I got that wrong. It's complicated. I'll leave that out then. But, it does happen, but at the same time, Haaretz has had openly on its opinion pages arguments about whether the problem of the crisis in Israel is the fault of the settlers or the fault of Zionism. And you'll never see that discussion in the New York Times, which just has a de facto liberal Zionist position and cannot even really address the Z word on sort of a objective intellectual basis. Benjamin Netanyahu, in one of his books, A Place Among the Nations, has a chapter called Jewish Power, and he talks about the importance of Jewish power. But if I wrote that chapter here, I would be called possibly an anti-Semite. So I think there is a higher comfort level in Israel with discussing things like that. But at the same time, if those discussions threaten the Jewish state, they feel like it's a threat to it somehow. Yuval Diskin, the former head of the Shin Bet, wrote a memo that everyone should know about, where he declared that the Israeli intelligence services will spy on and prosecute anyone who poses any threat to what he called, this is his language, the Jewish or democratic state of Israel, even if they use democratic means. So, okay. Oh, I see. So I think like it's not there may be like somewhat comfort in Israel, but Israelis who engage in that discussion in an effective way face persecution. The reason why Mal Mearsheimer said that, by the way, is because Gush Shalom, an Israeli left-wing group, hosted them for a talk that was really well received. And if you've ever seen the movie Defamation about the